the African National Congress, putting its weight behind government's decision to recall its diplomats from Israel for consultations. Mr. Bapela is back with us. He's the Deputy Chairperson of the International Relations Committee, Subcommittee in the ANC. Mr. Bapela, apologies for that loss in transmission to you. So let's pick up on the diplomatic effort, because South Africa, based on the language that I heard from the government officials who have spoken, there is still hope that South Africa could still prevail on Israeli authorities to say ceasefire and let's give attention, due regard to the humanitarian situation that is unfolding in Gaza. But what clout, what influence do you think that the South African government can have given the actions that you have now taken? Because when you recall your diplomats from a country, it does, as some people have explained, it does mean that the two countries are no longer seeing eye to eye.
Well, we don't hate the existence of Israel as a state, but we say there is a resolution of the two-state nation where Palestine ought to be a state on its own, free, coexisting alongside Israel, sharing the capital, Jerusalem, and living harmoniously amongst themselves as people. And therefore, if that resolution was implemented long ago, we will not be in this situation where now we then have to cut diplomatic ties to really put pressure as one of the weapons that we are using to put pressure on them to cease fire.
You've just used
also the carnage.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Too long.
Please allow me to interrupt you. You've just used a very interesting characterization of what South Africa is doing, and that is to, quote you, cut diplomatic ties. By recalling the diplomats, your diplomats from Tel Aviv, does that mean that South Africa, at some point, you are ready to marshal the Israeli ambassador back to his home country?
Well, the ANC as an organization has called on government to do exactly that. This March, the ambassador of Israel and his behavior and conduct has been also worrying. And I know that there will be processes by the Department of International Relations on how to do it, but he has to go until the ceasefire. And therefore, that's what we are calling for. As African National Congress, unambiguous about it, he has to go.
As a governing party, you are always in consultation with your deployees in government, as you would normally say. Do we have any idea at this stage as to when that might happen, where the Israeli ambassador is marched out of South Africa?
Well, the discussion took place yesterday at the working committee, and there's a special NEC meeting today, and definitely that message will be articulated and then given to our deployees that the ambassador of Israel should go for so long as the carnage continues, for so long as the bombing continues, for so long as the killing continues. He must just go home, and we'll then see when they cease fire, what will be the new elements and arrangements. And the ceasefire must end in a way to allow for talks and negotiations to take place.
Mr. Bapela, some people are going to say South Africa had an opportunity just last week to almost drum sense into one of Israel's backers, perhaps number one backer in this instance, given that they are arming them in this ongoing conflict, and that's the United States. You had diplomats from the U.S. in South Africa talking AGOA. Were there any moments where you used that occasion, perhaps on the sidelines, to say, or prevail on America to say, you've got to call on Israel to stop the war?
Well, remember, AGOA is not a South African program alone. It's an African continent program, and there were 37 ministers, and therefore the program was as tight, but obviously on the sides we do engage US, the embassy here in Pretoria, to say that we do not agree with that because we are one of the backers, and they are part of the P4, by the way, and the P4 is US, UK, France, and Germany. We are consistently engaging them, really, to bring sense, particularly around the humanitarian passages or corridors, so that we could then go and help. One of the issues that was raised was the establishment of clinics just on the safe spots within Gaza, so that those hospitals that were bombed, which were not supposed to have been bombed, children's centers that had been bombed, should not be, so that we could then quickly make sure, therefore, that we save lives of those that are already injured, so that then figure of the 4,000 children already killed does not go up. Yeah. But that issue obviously have been discussed on sites, not only taking advantage of AGOA, quietly, as we call it, the quiet diplomacy continues.
Final question to you, sir. Going back to the Israeli ambassador, the South African government yesterday coming out very strongly against him and using the words that the relationship between our government and him, because of his recent comments, that situation has become untenable now. I just want to find out from you, what is it that he said that the South African government takes as an insult, if you like?
We remember during the prayer service he spoke there, somewhere in Johannesburg, where other political parties participated, and the carnage was not as high as this, where he spoke in undermining our efforts of bringing peace, accusing us of taking sides on the Palestinian question, misrepresenting our policy, which says that the struggle for Palestinians has been a struggle that we've been supporting time immemorial. We have been together in the trenches fighting for freedom within the solution of the two-state theory. And we have never departed from that, but within the borders of 1967, as I was agreed. So he then went out to misrepresent us, that we hate Israel, we hate the Jewish, and which is not the case. What we hate is the Zionism, a doctrine by some radical and conservatives, Zionists, who have a doctrine that says they must wipe and kill all Palestinians so that there can be peace in Palestine. And that's not what we're saying. 4 million Palestinians are in exile. 10,000 more have already been killed, and the killing continues. That doctrine should be stopped, must be stopped, and therefore the ambassador was just misrepresenting our views, and that is why government has took that particular stand. And we are in support as the African National Congress.
As I let you go, if South Africa does sever ties with Israel, there are trade relations between ourselves and Israel. Are you prepared to forego those kinds of relations?
Well, discussions are still going on. I do not want them to preempt. There is a call all over the world that we must then go for sanctions and disinvestment as part of a program and campaign. But within that movement, we are still discussing, because we need to weigh and look at the circumstances, and if we do it within the broader collective, not just as South Africa, but definitely the continuing of the discussion is on. But also we might also have to target certain goods, not broadly, so that we can inflict some pain at some point or the other. But all those are only going to be considered through the broader consultations in South Africa, broader consultation with the Palestinian solidarity movements in the continent, in South Africa and the world, including meeting with the Palestinian leadership, because they also must be the ones that guide the world. Because when we went on our own campaign, it was led by the African National Congress. It was us who went to say what and not what, because at the end we do not want to see the people suffering. But obviously the solidarity element calls that certain aspects might then have to be targeted at a particular point in time. let me not preempt as to what will be the outcome of those discussions, but the option of a boycott or option of disinvestment remains on the table.
Mr. Bapela, I know that I said I was letting you go, but, as you continue talking, new questions seem to come up. I promise you this is a final one. Whilst we're on the subject of trade relations, you are saying that discussions are ongoing about a possible disinvestment from Israel by South Africa. But if we listen carefully to what you're saying, how is it appropriate for South Africa continuing to trade with the United States that is arming Israel? Because those weapons, some of those weapons that are shelling Gaza every now and then, some of them do come from America. So how is it okay to have discussions to disinvest from Israel, and you're not prepared to do the same with one of your largest trading partners, the United States?
Well, as I said and as I was explaining, there's no contradiction. What we say is the boycott on Israel products or disinvestment in the economic aspects cannot be one country alone. We ought to move in as multiple countries. That includes European countries, that includes the governments in the Latin America and elsewhere, that includes in governments here, so that we could squeeze them to a corner, including the supporter of that particular ammunition and weapons that goes in there. And hence, I say, let's allow those discussions to be concluded. And if at any given time they include the U.S., we'll then look at it and then take a view and then take a decision around it. I do understand that it's not an easy response that one can give because those consultations are still going on. And we will definitely embark and taking lessons from the South African way campaign during the 70s and the 80s on cultural boycott, on sports boycott, also including. We might even start with those type of softer parts and then gradually grow and then mobilize and ensure that even the trade union movements globally can also come in. If at that point then they've included America goods, then let it be. We will definitely have been consulted, and then we'll take a view and a decision around those issues. But we leave the option of disinvestment and boycott to those talks, but obviously the rallying and the mobilization of all forces, because South Africa's economy is $250 million US dollars between us and Israel, is insignificant, is very less, is not as big as the US and the others. So you weigh on those issues also as to whether it will have any effect if it's only us, South Africa, boycotting or disinvesting. And we said no, it must be something more punchy, more powerful, that all the world can really be with us. Those governments that do not support, obviously they will then be exposed and will then take decisions on those issues. So I think it's as complex, not an easy response, but otherwise discussions are going on.
Absolutely understood. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Bapela. Very, very interesting discussions going on in the background then. But for the governing party, I suppose the immediate priority is to see the back of the Israeli ambassador to South Africa right now.